For those of you just jumping on here, we'll give a few minutes for everyone to log on, and we'll do a quick introduction for Dr. Newton and get started. But we'll give it a couple minutes to let people get back from training and get settled here and grab a glass of water and get started.
Yeah, I know I was just down doing the pickup at Howelson right before this, and the parking lot was pretty full and it was quite slick. So some people might be just getting back home.
Yep.
The time change is it's kind of unfortunate when you do pick up kids at 5:30. It's really getting dark. I hate to see the sunshine go.
Yeah.
For those of you jumping on, we'll just take another minute or two to let folks join us, and then we'll get started.
So Dave, you're able to see folks, and are
Yep.
they
They're
appearing? Are they going to appear on my Zoom?
They're not going to. So the way I've set these up is as a webinar.
Okay.
So they are on here as attendees, and we don't have the ability to see them.
That's
But
fine.
I can't unmute them, so they can ask questions though. Yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
No
I just
worries.
set it up this way so you're not going to be interrupted by people making dinner and stuff like that in the background, which can be a little bit of a problem.
Oh my gosh, there's 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
well, I teach a class of 220 students, so when I Zoom, that's
you
a
are
lot
a pro.
of boxes.
You are a pro. Yeah. Also,
well,
you keep the videos on. Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, it's you kind of see students do that.
Oh yeah, a little bit, right? There's something lost when they're not in person, right? Even in a lecture hall like that, right?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I think I will get started. We're having some file in here right now, but just in the interest of time, I think we will get started and to respect Dr. Newton's time here this evening. For those of you who I don't know out there, I'm Dave Stewart, Athletic Director with the Winter Sports Club, and tonight we're going to hear from Dr. Maria Newton. This is the last of these parent education talks that we'll do this fall. I just send a big thank you out to our parents for joining us for these. I know it's not easy to find the time with our busy schedule, especially with COVID right now, to find the time for presentations like this. So thank you so much for taking the time and jumping on and joining these. This will be recorded. If you want to share this with your friends, I'll post it to our website as well and spread it out for our parents to see. And if you want to circle back, I know it'll be a lot of information from Dr. Newton, so you'll have that opportunity to view it there too. That said, I think we saved our best for last in terms of our fall parent education series with Dr. Newton right now. She's the Director of Graduate Studies in Health Kinesiology at the University of Utah. Her research is focused on optimizing the experience and motivation of athletes. Her presentation tonight will be considerations for optimizing the development of youth sport athlete. Focus on how to create and reinforce a supportive, motivating, positive climate for kids, and how parents can help contribute to this. So a really, really important topic from my perspective in my role. No one has the level of impact on kids that parents do. It's not even close. Coaches, peers, and anything that parents can do to help support that healthy development of kids will go a long way and help us all in this effort. In terms of the format this evening, Maria will present for around 45 minutes, which will leave about 15-20 minutes for some discussion at the end. So please, if you have some questions as we go along, write them down, and then we can enter them into the chat box at the end. Or if you'd like to ask them directly, please feel free to just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. And with that, we have another connection to Dr. Newton here, and who recommended her actually to speak to the club is our mental strength coach, Luke Brosterhouse. who's also on the call right now. And Luke wanted to say a few words. Dr. Newton was Luke's advisor during his program at the University of Utah. So Luke, you want to hop in?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Very excited to get to introduce Dr. Newton, and very excited that she's able to spend some time with us. I had the great privilege of studying under Dr. Newton at the University of Utah, and just an incredible resource, an incredible researcher, professor, and a fantastic athlete and coach in her own right, and is just able to sort of bring it all together. So very excited for this, and I'm going to let Dr. Newton take it away. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Gosh, thanks so much for the invitation, Dave and Luke. It's really fun. You know, COVID is interesting because yesterday seems a lot like today, which will be a lot like tomorrow. And this really brings some excitement to my professional life. And so I'm really happy to be here. I have to admit that when you invited me, Dave, I had visions of my childhood. It was spent careening around Colorado with my father and my brother in a Dodge, brown Dodge with a big V8 engine. That thing could plow through Colorado. And we spent many a day at this resort right here. And so I'm wondering if any of you know this resort. And it's Ski Cooper. And back in the day, I'm quite old, so back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, that was quite the mountain. It was the cheapest lift ticket in Colorado, so that is where we would go. And I just have memories of that. And while I never was a ski racer, I spent my life skiing, and skiing is in my blood. And the fondest memories I have are with my father skiing, because I would sleep in the bucket seat in the front seat with my head on his lap, and he would blare his John Denver tunes on the cassette tape, and we would go flying around Colorado. And I just have no fonder memories. And so it was really nice to revisit those memories. As Dave said, I'll chat for 40 minutes or so. If you have a pressing question, you know, pop it up there on the chat and we'll get to it. Otherwise, we'll capture them at the end. I've spent my career thinking about motivation, quite honestly, and optimizing the motivational experience primarily for youth athletes, because sport is such a fundamental activity and an important activity within the lives of youth. I think understanding motivation, learning how to optimize it, and then kind of putting it together with youth development is just absolutely critical. So that's what I'll touch on today, a little bit of youth development, a little bit of motivation. So when I think about motivation, and I'd like you to do the same thing, there's an acronym associated with it, and it's PACE, P-A-C-E. And what that stands for is persistence, attitude, choice, and effort. So when you're looking to see if your athletes, your kids are motivated, you look for those four things, and we're looking for ways that we can optimize those four things. So persistence, do they hang in there, particularly when it's tough? It is extremely easy to be motivated when things are fine. It's when you're challenged, do kids persist, particularly when they're faced with obstacles. Attitude. It's incredibly important to have a positive, energized attitude within myself, but among others. So do you see that in your skiers? Do you see that in yourself? Do you see that in the coaches? Choice. What choices are these kids making about attending training, attending practice, attending competition, attending to their studies? Those choices tell you where their interests lie and their motivation lies. And lastly is effort. So the effort piece is incredibly important. It's the foundation of motivation, is do kids try hard? So if you're ever looking, if you're ever asking yourself if your child is motivated for any particular activity, just think PACE and just go through that checklist. And so tonight, what we're going to try to do is optimize PACE and at least get you to reflect on those types of things that might harm PACE and those things that might facilitate PACE. I would love for you to be a little bit engaged at this moment in time. We'll come back to this chat afterwards, but I'd like to have note of, and you can go to your chat box and just enter in what the major goals you have for enrolling your kid in this program, right? How would you like them to benefit from the experience? So I'm going to leave you for a minute and just sit here. So I'd like for you to take a moment and go ahead and enter into the chat box if you could. Just your thoughts. You know, why is your kid enrolled in this program? And I'll leave you be for about a minute. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much. I see things popping in there. I can't read them, but that's okay. We'll come back to them at the end. You know, my guess is you have a couple things. You want your kid to thrive and you want your kid to ski well, right? You want the best of both worlds. You want them to have a positive youth development experience, but then you also want them to develop some mastery in skiing. And those things are kind of right in my bailiwick and the things that I'm very much interested in. So tonight's focus, we're going to do two things. We're going to try to talk about how to set the stage for those two things to happen, thriving and optimal performance. And I'm going to have two focuses. The first will be on adolescent development on the left-hand side of the screen. I think we all wish and hope that adolescent development kind of followed this path, that it was a positive, linear, smooth trajectory towards development, right? But in reality, it's more similar to what's happening on the right, is that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step left, 1 step right, 5 steps backwards. It's a jumble. And I would imagine that a lot of your skiers are somewhere in the middle of this knot. And so the goal will be to share with you some things that are happening developmentally, but then also share with you some strategies to maybe navigate this knot so that it doesn't drive everybody crazy and we all come out at the end, which we all do, but it's a very challenging time. The second part, and what will be the focus of this discussion, is what I like to term the psychological climate. This analogy, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower, I think is very telling. Lots of times when athletes are not being successful, we blame the athlete and we look for what's wrong in the athlete. And I think a better place to look, and something that's within our control, is the setting. And I think it's very useful to think about the water we give that flower, the sunshine, the nutrients, the fertilizer, the weeds, the toxins. and be able to recognize that everything we give an athlete, if the athlete is the flower, is of our own choosing, and to really begin to recognize what are the nutrients that this athlete needs to successfully develop in a competitive environment. And oftentimes we don't pay enough attention to this. And the psychological climate is my primary area of research. So we'll dive into that pretty heavily. Hopefully, both of these things will resonate with you and you'll pick up a few tidbits of information that might be useful to you. So, adolescent development. I think we're all super cognizant of the physiological and physical differences and changes that occur. But boy, you know, what's really interesting to me are the more psychological ones, what happens cognitively, what happens emotionally, and what happens socially as kids are navigating the knot, so to speak. So the big cognitive change obviously is this shift from concrete to abstract reasoning. What that means is that kids are able to analyze situations logically in terms of cause and effect. They can appreciate hypothetical dilemmas. They can think about the future. They can plan. They can have goals. They can engage in introspection and sometimes mature decision making. We all need that to be functioning adults, but as that progression is occurring, what tends to happen is kids argue for the sake of arguing. We all know that. They're just testing their ideas. They're testing this new abstract thinking skill set that they have. They'll also tend to be very self-centered. To be expected. It's normal. They'll fluctuate back and forth. They're going to be attached to you, then they don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's their emerging independence kind of bubbling to the surface. So they're going to step out on their own a little bit. They're going to be independent. They're going to be self-centered. Those things are normal. We want them to do that. But it's a change and a challenge when we see our own child going through those things. So what can we do as a team, as a parent, to kind of navigate that? Personally, for me, these are the two biggest changes that occur that I need you to be aware of, because you may be aware of this change in cognition and the social changes as well. But really important as your kid is going through this ski program, as they're going through school, is two things. They're developing their self-concept, which are all the beliefs and descriptors they have about themselves, what they value, their goals, their interests. That's their self-concept. So they're forming their self-concept every time they ski, every time they go to school, every time they have friends over. They're testing it. What do I really want to be? Who am I? What kind of person am I? They're also forming their self-esteem. And both of these things are so critical to be a functioning adult, but their self-esteem is all about, I am worthy, I am valuable. So you can see, right, if you place a kid who is struggling with these cognitive and emotional changes into a team, that team can either support these things or they cannot. And kids can have issues around self-concept. Kids can have issues around self-esteem. So we want to know exactly how we can be more embracing of this change. Lastly, in terms of social changes, I think you're well aware, it's a shift from parents to peers. This is where ski team makes a tremendous amount of difference, because kids are now looking towards their peers, what's happening among peers and how that psychological climate is structured has great impact on what they view as their self-concept, as their self-worth, as what's valuable. So our influence as parents, unfortunately, has decreased a little bit. And so it is that climate on the team. It is their peers that are starting to have greater influence. And that's important to keep in mind. And also important then to create peer groups that are really positive and adaptive. And then there's the shift to less conformity. They're testing out their ideas. They're trying to figure out who they are, so they will not want to do what you tell them to do. And again, all of these are to be expected, and also not to be fought against, but they're to be understood and worked with. So those are the changes psychologically, I think, that inform everything that's happening to your kids as they are with you in school and training. So this really captures what's happening in the knot, at least from a psychological perspective. So what do we do psychologically to kind of ease that transition? I personally do not want this smooth, linear, positive progression through adolescence. We need the disruption for growth to occur. It's just like in skiing and training for sport. You need to challenge the system. There have to be perturbations. There have to be times in which you're not comfortable. That's when growth occurs. But there are lots of things that we can do as a team, as parents, as coaches, administrators, to support their development. I think super important is this idea of just closeness within the family, but then also within the team, because the peer group is so powerful at that point. So knowing everybody on the team, knowing their likes and dislikes, knowing their values, their goals, who they are, what their family's doing, what their dog's name is, where they're going on vacation, that demands open communication. That demands just being open to the conversation and non-judgmental as much as possible. True, there are boundaries, true, there are rules, but one thing we know with kids is they shut off, right? They don't talk. And even if it's you doing the talking with a silent partner next to you, that's fine. Keep the communication going. Folks also need really positive pathways for testing. I like to say even to my freshman college students that one of the reasons you go to college is because it's a safe place to fail. And it is. And youth sport is an incredibly safe place to fail and test boundaries, test ideas, test goals, because you have a whole support system surrounding you, not only the family, but the coaches, the trainers, etc. So recognize the ski club as a setting that will be positive and supportive and a safe place to test. I will bring this up kind of multiple times today, I think, but consistency is absolutely critical. Even though you think your teen is not paying attention to you, your adolescent is not paying attention, they're paying attention, absolutely focused, laser focused on you. And the consistency piece is absolutely critical. Also being very positive and supportive. It's a lot easier said than done. This is a very challenging time. But nonetheless, consistency and patience and support is critical. If you remember on the last slide, notions around self-concept and self-worth, I think one of the best things that parents and organized youth sports programs can do is to just support growth, efficacy. Albert Bandura has this saying that if we do one thing in a kid's life is it's to make them agentic, and that's to support and grow a sense of agency that I can do this. That's what efficacy is. It's the belief in my ability to do stuff. And the way in which you build self-worth is to support somebody's agency, to support their efficacy. So you're always consistently feeding notions around effort, because effort builds agency. Lastly, and this is where youth development programs, be they what they may, and this ski club is particularly relevant here, Because kids are turning away from parents and relying more on teens, it's absolutely critical that you have top grade peer modeling, that your kid is around other good kids, basically, that the team is fostering kindness, gratitude, efficacy, support, communication, collaboration. When you do those things, they seep into kids. And that's where you have top rate peer modeling, because kids are paying attention to kids. So it's that culture on the team. It's the philosophy of the program. It's how coaches treat kids. It's how kids treat kids. All of these things will not make this not go away, but it will ease your transition through it. I have a little graphic here on the right, and I think it's something to keep in mind. Oftentimes, we tend to think that the skier, the adolescent, is influenced by coaches. Absolutely. Is influenced by parents. Absolutely. One of the big changes in adolescence is the influence of peers. So it's really incredibly important as a team, as a family, to understand that influence and to know the peers, but then also do everything we can to cultivate the attributes in our youngsters that we want our kids to assimilate. So that means kindness, that means gratitude, effort, collaboration, communication. Recognizing that you're going to swing and miss 2 times out of 3. It's just not going to work. Thankfully, adolescence is a long time, or not thankfully, but recognize the influence that peers have might give you greater motivation to foster those relationships, but also foster the attributes in your own kid and their peers that you want to see, because that's who kids are paying attention to. Okay, we're changing topics. So this is, again, kind of my area, and my area is called the psychological climate, and sometimes it's called the motivational climate. Those of us in sport and exercise psychology, this is a large area of study for us, because we do believe that the climate, the context, the setting in which sport occurs is motivationally relevant. All of us have experienced a motivational climate. So when you walk into an office setting, when you walk into your kid's classroom, when you walk into a training facility or on the competitive field, there's an energy you sense. And the energy is, do I feel welcomed? Is effort valued here? Is ability valued here? Is gratitude valued here? Where is the energy focused, on every person in the room or just a select few? Are mistakes tolerated here, or are they eschewed? What's the bottom line? The results or the process? How are people treated? With respect or dismissively? That's the motivational climate. It's that all of those things in the environment that when we enter into a particular setting that are emphasized, valued, recognized, and rewarded. That climate is created by those in power and those in the climate, but primarily bosses, teachers, coaches, trainers. They set the stage for the climate to emerge based on what it is they value and reward and communicate. And so it's really important for us to understand the climate, but then also realize we create it. The climate can be whatever it is we want it to be. And so to recognize the climate, when pay attention when you enter spaces, what's valued, what's respected, what's rewarded, what's emphasized. Those things will impact the individuals in the setting motivationally. It'll influence pace, persistence, attitude, choice, and effort. And I just listed a bunch of things that may be in the climate. So these things might be emphasized, they might be rewarded. They could be focused on, they could be, a coach or teacher talks about these things, frames things all the time. So you could have a setting where cooperation, wow, everybody's working together. Oh, look at this. Only the skiers who are the best get all the attention. Oh, okay, ability is really the number one mover here. Look at that. It's my way or the highway. Sometimes you see that in teachers or coaches or bosses. You could have a climate where improvement, where everything, every task, every drill is all about improvement and effort and task mastery and doing better and getting better, irrespective of ability level. Improvement can happen irrespective. So that may be a focus. It could be a setting where if someone says something wrong or does something wrong, they're punished, verbally, non-verbally. It could be a climate where mistakes are really just part of the process. Like, this is awesome. Maybe outdoing others. Respect could be in the climate. So I've just listed a bunch of potential elements in the psychological or motivational climate. Here are the same ones, and I've just color-coded them for you. All of the research points to the ones in green being very wonderful for you, for your child and any person motivationally. And the ones in red will just blow up motivation, right? It will squish it. So it's interesting to me. So a climate that endorses cooperation, respect, effort, open communication, voice and choice, improvement, kindness, mistakes. Those are the climates that optimize motivation. They're also, if you think back to adolescent development, the types of attributes we want to see in our kids and that will seep over into the kids during that difficult adolescent development time period. This is kind of tough in a sports setting sometimes for coaches and parents to understand, because at the end of the day, skiing is about ability. Get down the hill fastest. Skiing is about outdoing others. I want to get on the podium more than you. Skiing is about being pretty tough on mistakes. We have to correct those in order for you to do better. So in some respects, and I'll be happy to address these questions if you have any, in some respects, it's pretty almost counterintuitive that a climate that endorses effort or respect, very open to mistakes, improvement, voice and choice, kindness are the ones that will be most helpful to your skier. Sometimes that's hard for parents and coaches to really put into their philosophy about how skiing should work. So my colleagues and I have written a book about this. And we've looked at all of the elements of the motivational climate, and we've tried to whittle them down to the essentials of the ones that are just super duper important for skill development and for optimal development. And optimal development, we're really interested in developing good people. And so we whittled all of these characteristics down into 5 primary components. The first being mutual kindness and respect are fostered and valued. The second, effort and improvement are valued and recognized. Third, mistakes are absolutely integral to learning. Fourth, every player plays an important role in a team. And lastly, cooperation among teammates is fostered. So what are we saying here? We call this a caring and task involving climate. So this is a type of motivational climate that the literature suggests is most conducive to optimizing motivation and facilitating positive youth development. Generically, it's often just called a positive climate. So I'm getting a little technical on you, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do today is kind of go over 3 of the 5 components, the ones that I think are kind of will probably resonate with you most, and mutual kindness, effort and improvement, and mistakes. So in general, we have to recognize the impact that we have on kids. And if you want a climate that's conducive to motivation and positive development, you need to model these elements in every single interaction, in every instance of feedback. Kids are clever. If you get off message, they'll notice it, and they'll take that tangent and run with it. It takes intentionality. It takes biting your tongue. It takes a lot of pausing to provide feedback and interact in a way that supports a positive climate. And my primary suggestion here is recognize it's intentional, but then until it's a habit, pause. Don't say anything, don't react. You have to consider what you want to say and how you want to react. When it is a habit, pause again, because sport is an emotionally riveting setting, and oftentimes we react without adequate pause. So I would just encourage you to pause all the time. And then recognize as well that it's athlete, team, peer, coach, right? It's all a big gumbo. And if you're on this team, it's important to support the messages on this team and to be of one voice, because again, conflicting messages send a very messed up message to adolescents, and they don't know which way to go if the messages are divergent. So one of the first elements of carrying a task involving climate is this idea to teach your athlete kindness and respect. If you were to ask all of my co-authors which is the most important element of a psychological climate, it is this. And a majority of coaches and athletes dismiss this. And so that is where I would like to start, but it's also, I'd like you to be very self-reflective and remember the intentionality piece. One of the suggestions we make in the book is get to know your athletes, welcome them every day. And we get looks oftentimes when we do workshops, it's like, of course we do that. Geez Louise. I've been to many practices. I've been to many competitions. Parents and coaches do not do this. They are not intentional in knowing exactly the family, what every kid's like and dislikes are, how they're doing in school, where are they struggling, how is their dog doing, all of that. You need to know. And it's not only that my coach knows my kid, it's me as a parent, I need to know about the other kids. And I need to say something to them every practice when I see them. I need to pat them on the back. I need to throw them a, hey, bud, what's going on? How's school going? How's that chemistry test? Those connections, kids need to feel like someone's paying attention to me. I'm welcomed in this environment. People want me here. I can contribute. And so that's multiple messages coming from every which way. Once that is done, then we can think about kindness and respect. And I just pulled some quotes out so that you can see how these conversations might occur. This is intentionality in action. Is that when's the last time you told your skier, Jasmine, your coach has put in a lot of hours training, planning your training. They must really care about you. How can you thank them? We don't say that to we take coaches for granted. We take all the administrators in your ski club for granted. We take the folks who set up the gates for granted. So if we can orient a kid to think about that, it is facilitating the development of kindness and respect in them. It's also really cool to start trying to figure out how we can develop some empathy for others when we're in this setting. Scotty, you know how sometimes Jake struggles in races? It's kind of like how you struggled in chemistry last year. Do you remember how you turned the corner? Yeah, man, that's a help from your classmates and teachers. What do you think? Right? You're trying to get Scotty to step in the shoes of Jake, and you're trying to get Scotty to realize that he might be able to help Jake. That is respect. That is kindness. But you have to set the table for an adolescent. You can't expect these athletes to come up with this at all. But if you set the table, right? Consistency. You'd be surprised what's picked up as athletes will now understand. It's important for me to see who is really in my setting. It's important for me to worry about all the other athletes. Lastly, Claire, you know Beth just joined the team. Gosh, do you remember how hard it was? What do you think you could do? Again, kindness, respect, welcoming, facilitating that psychological development in the athletes in the ski setting, just using what happens in an everyday setting. So this idea of teaching kindness and respect, I think, is critical. Secondly, reinforce effort and improvement. I could write the term ability up here and put a big red X across it. Effort and improvement, task mastery, technique improvement have to be the fulcrum, the basis of every single thing you do in an achievement setting. Skiing is an achievement setting. If you focus on ability, kids can't win that game because there's only one person that has the best ability. You have 100 skiers. So if you focus on ability, only one kid feels successful. If you focus on effort, 100 can, because effort is a relative term. I can try my hardest and I can feel great value for that. But if you start comparing me to other people, I'm never going to win that game. And so effort is central. And what I did here was I tried to share with you some things that I oftentimes hear in a sports setting that focus on ability and are very inappropriate. This is the typical car ride home after a race. Did you win? What was your time? What were the final standings? If you had just carved that edge a little bit more, that course was totally unfair. Following a race is the most emotionally pivotal time in an adolescent's life. All of us can remember those moments. They're seared into our brain. The thing that comes out of a parent or a coach's mouth at that particular moment of time is so pivotal. I can't tell you. When these things are said, you're emphasizing effort and you're emphasizing things outside of the athlete's control. And it does nothing to optimize pace. It does nothing to make the kid feel like they are loved. In the green, I've put some things that are great to see, great to say. Just great. You're making connections. You're focusing on effort. What did you do well in the race? Did you have fun? Did you support your teammates? These are things you want, right? You want them to have fun, support their teammates. You want them to reflect on what they did well. Did you give your best effort from start to finish? My most favorite one is this, and I'm borrowing this from my mother. I was a competitive tennis player for 35 years. Every time I played tennis and I would come off the court, my mother would look at me and she goes, I love watching you play tennis. It brings a tear to my eye. You couldn't say anything better. You're saying everything. I was so proud of the effort you gave. All those things that focus on stuff that kids can control. and making some connections for them, right? It's that intentionality. I was just thinking about how much your hard work is paying off. Make those connections for athletes. If you take nothing else from this talk, I hope you never say this again. This is the last one. The other piece is mistakes are part of learning. We're a culture of perfectionists. We love perfection. We love to do things right or don't do them at all. So we're afraid to show our weaknesses. We're afraid to push boundaries. We're afraid to challenge ourselves oftentimes. I want you to think about when your athlete is skiing for fun between the trees out of sight of you, what do? They go nuts. They make mistakes, they fall, they crash, they try new ways of doing things, they challenge themselves, they make a lot of mistakes because they know no one is judging them. And when no one is judging them, they're able to spread their wings, right? And they're able to develop outside of their current cocoon. So it's really imperative that you reinforce the idea that everyone makes mistakes and make those connections between great skiers and the mistakes they made. The best attitude you can give is to bring it on. The bigger the challenge, the more excited I am. And that mistakes are the only place that you really improve. And mistakes can leave an indelible mark. When there are big mistakes done in races, post-race is not the time to bring them up. Let things settle, tell them that you love to watch them ski, and there'll be time enough to handle it afterwards. So kindness and respect, effort and improvement, mistakes are part of learning, being very intentional, being very consistent, making connections for athletes. I'm going to leave you with this, just final thoughts. And it's almost my responsibility to share with you some things that really destroy more motivation because I focused more on what optimizes it. Embarrassment, sarcasm, ridicule. From parent to kid, coach to kid, importantly, right, in youth sports, from kid to kid. No bueno. That is, adults don't know what to make of that, right? Where do I put that comment? I think you just hurt my feelings, but I'm not certain. Being passive aggressive is also a no-no, just because it's not clear communication and it's not honest. Lastly, making your kindness, your love, your attention, your communication contingent on how well your kid performs is off base. And I will mention one over here before finishing up. I work with a youth program in Salt Lake City. It works with very at-risk kids. They have multiple program sites across the valley. I work with each and every one of them. When I go into the roughest site, so to speak, and I go see the director and I walk into her office, she has a plaque above her desk. The desk is strewn with papers, etc. And it just said, kids need a mentor, not a critic. And I think that's very valuable, is that kids need support and love and agency and efficacy and self-worth. And that's usually done through mentoring and not being that critical. And I'll let you read the rest. So that's it for me. Some things to take home. I hope I got you thinking a little bit, but I'm more than happy to address any questions or comments you might have.
Dr. Newton, thank you so much. That was wonderful. You know, I'll leave people some time to maybe to add some questions into the chat. And if you want to raise hands, I can unmute you. One thing I wanted to ask you to go back to, I really like, was slide 9.
Oh, I'm glad you like that.
And I think, you know, one thing I like about this, I'm constantly looking for things that are both supporting high performance development and personal development. You know, our mission in the club is creating champions on and off the mountain. When I see this slide, I see this also as being the attributes of a high performance climate, in addition to a positive climate. And I was wondering if that's something that you've considered or looked at in your research, that intersection between those two initiatives.
No, that's a really good question and a nice, good point. Yes, right. They're attributes of both. A lot of this research, it's really interesting, is happening in Europe. There was a program, a huge research study called the PAPA study that happened through from Spain all the way up to, I think, Norway, multiple countries, and they installed a climate similar to this. And it was primarily with soccer athletes, but it was like, what impact does this climate have? And it does. It's all about high performance. I mean, we can't kid ourselves, right? We're in a setting where high performance is valued. And what we do know is that effort is central. We also know that we need to be challenged. Mistakes are absolutely critical. But every kid needs to have an important role. We need some cooperation. And then the kindness and respect is sometimes left like it's a positive climate attribute. So the two aspects I think that are really related to performance are that effort and value and mistakes piece. You have to have that mentality that I have to master tasks. That's how I feel successful, is when I work hard, when I try, when I keep coming back day after day, and I need to make mistakes because therein I learn.
Great. And I think one thing you see in high performance cultures is to get to a high level, you have to do this for a long time, right? And to do it for a long time, you have to feel good about it, right? You have to feel good about where you are and the place that you're in to be able to learn, right? You have to feel like you're supported. So that slide resonated with me, and
Well,
what I think we want to
interview
try to foster.
athlete after athlete after athlete, high performing athletes, Drew Brees, LeBron James, anybody. It's about the process. It's about the process. And what that's code for, it's a long process, but it's about effort. It's about me understanding my craft. And to understand your craft takes some reflection, but then just daily effort and improvement and task mastery.
Great.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? I've seen there's some comments, some thank you comments, and some great presentation comments come in. Are there any questions? If anyone wants to raise a hand or just type it into the chat, I'd be happy to relay it too. Great comment. You have to love the process, to daily practice the process.
Well, and what are kids looking for? They're looking for something they can control, that they have agency over. And lots of times they have to go to school. Their parents are always telling them what to do. And so when we were young, I remember hitting a tennis ball against a garage for hour after hour, and I never felt happier. I mean, if I could go back to that 9-year-old self and do that and get those feelings, that's because I was in control. I was making those choices and the effort was there. And we tend to beat that out of kids a little, unfortunately, right? That passion for the sport. So we can endorse all of these things, but then we also have to recognize kind of the joy and passion and fun involved in high level performance and kind of that pathway.
Great. And Luke, I think you're out there. I'd love to hear how you feel this connects to your work and mental strength with the club.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a couple questions that have come to mind, and I was hoping maybe Dr. Newton, you could touch on one of the things that I think is really relevant to what you just presented, and one of the things I see on a daily basis, both in coaching and also as a parent, is the relationship and how to talk about ability and talent, and how different those two things are to different kids, and how they perceive them, and how to talk about effort as it relates to talent. Because I think we get a lot of, we send a lot of messages to kids at an early age, like, oh, you're so great, you're so naturally talented, you're so good. And then eventually that is just, it's a recipe for all these potential pitfalls down the road. And I think that's something I'd love to hear you maybe just touch on, if you wouldn't mind.
That's a tricky one, isn't it? Right? So talent is potential, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the ways to frame it, right? Because we all have talent, and the ability piece is based, Well, we're talking about ability in two different ways. You could talk about ability as something that effort has created, a capability in you to do certain things. I'm viewing ability as this thing that doesn't really, like, you have no control over it. When you're thinking about talent, it's tricky to even bring that up with an adolescent, because one of the things the research has shown over and over and over is a kid at 10 is very different from a kid at 14, is very different from a kid at 18. They mature differently. Their interests are different. Psychologically, they mature differently. So even bringing up that with a 10-year-old, right? With a 10-year-old about their talent, that's a tricky one to even bring into the conversation, because what you're setting the stage for is lack of effort. Because if I have the talent, if I'm a natural, I don't need to do squat because I've got it. It's all in me. So making those, that's when I would pause and I would be careful to even use that language.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the default, I see with a lot of, inadvertent compliments from, other parents or other grandparents, oh, you're so great, you're a natural. You just see that so much. And I think it's an important discussion to kind of touch on. So I appreciate
Oh,
that.
I completely agree. And that's that intentionality, is you need to reframe those things, or, it's compliments are great. There's nothing wrong with throwing those a direction, but then, gosh, you're so skilled because you've worked so hard. That sends me an entirely different message. If I'm skilled at something, you're saying, good work, you built up a skill, and because I tried hard. But if you say you're a natural, you're opening the back door for me I don't need to work because I'm a natural. So you've got to couch those and reframe those for athletes. Oh gosh, yeah. Many a career has been laid bare because of talent statements.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Dave, I think just to, one of the things to point out with our mental skills training program at the club that we started last year is, I think one of the hallmarks for the athletes is just building the ability to have a bit more self-control and a bit more ability to, as Maria was talking about earlier, the ability to kind of stop and think and not let emotions just overrun the process. And so I'd say if there's one key ingredient to, or one foundational piece to our mental skills training program before we get into imagery and goal setting, it's that ability to stop and think and the ability to regulate our emotional response to situations. So it's just great to hear Maria talk about this and reinforce that message. So glad you could spend some time with us.
It's great to see you guys.
And just one thing too, just thinking this idea of agency. I think when I think about great coaching, I think about great coaching should lead to an athlete who can be their own best coach, who doesn't need a coach, who might work with a coach, but is that idea of learning that they can do this themselves. That is something I think that connects both to outside of sport and to personal development, but also towards high performance development. They need to be able to learn what they need to do to become better. But those skills transfer over to everything else in life, right? So that this agency piece seems to be a really important one, which I haven't seen spoken about very much. This idea of fostering agency.
Agency and autonomy. I mean, you can think of the double A's. You're exactly right, though. Sometimes in sport, because the relationships, I mean, as a competitive tennis player, I would hit a ball and look at the coach, hit the ball, look at the coach. You want feedback, continuous feedback. I couldn't do it. You feel like you can't do anything without the coach's feedback. And that's not a very healthy place to be. Very good coaching will kind of push an athlete at the end of the diving board and say, okay, it's up to you now. You decide. I've given you the skills. And it's eye-opening to athletes to realize that you have to self-regulate and you have to take ownership. And the agency part is what makes it so much fun, because there's a little bit of a codependence between athletes and coaches. When on the professional women's tennis circuit, they've allowed coaches to go down onto the court that's ridiculous. I mean, and it really has created this umbilical cord between athlete and coach that does the athlete no good, particularly in adolescence, because you want a kid with agency in college.
Great.
Hmm.
That's as a college coach, I've seen that. Having had experience with athletes who reached a very high level, but had their hands held maybe too much and overly prescribed versus those who were encouraged to develop their own training. There's a big difference in how prepared those athletes were to be successful at the next level. I can say that certainly.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting that tends to be more typical in the tertiary sports, somewhat like Nordic skiing or something that isn't highly funded at the university level. Is I love interacting with those athletes. I do not enjoy interacting with basketball and football because they're just waiting for you to do, give it to me. You should give this to me. But if I go talk to swimmers, they're having to kind of make it on their own, and you can really see that how that agency informs what they do in the pool, but then also, gosh, just their life dreams are so much more actualized because they've self-reflected on it. And that's where coaching, where you kind of have to be there, but then also recognize when it's time to step away.
Great. John, you had a hand raised. I think you're unmuted now if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thank you, Dr. Newton. That was a great presentation. I feel bad to even ask this question. It was nice to have an hour of no talk about COVID, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I understand that Governor Herbert there in Utah has put a 2-week suspension on youth sport activities. We hope that doesn't happen here, but we've had over 200 kids in our high school put on quarantine. Do you have any thoughts of ways that as parents we can help our kids have the right motivational climate during a period where they can't participate with their peers in the sport?
That is a tough one. The pure sadness is that I think sports were integral to helping kids get through COVID. I'm also a swimmer, and when they opened the pools up to the swim teams, I was sad because they took my lanes, but I was also incredibly happy that the kids were able to have that social connection, but then also the physical connection. One other passion I have is the link between physical activity and mental well-being. And I study it here at the university setting where the mental well-being of students is on the decline, and it has been for a number of years. So even if your kids are unable to be active with other kids, I would strongly encourage you to somehow be active with them, if only for the impact that it has on stress, anxiety, and depression. And you may find, if you can be active with them, that the bonds that you form with them will be somewhat new and positive, because you're usually taking and dropping kids off at an organized activity. All of a sudden now it's you and I. But if I were to get tricky with you, I would be vigorous physical activity as opposed to moderate, and it would be for an extended period of time. You can work up to it. That's where you get the antidepressive, anti-anxiety impact of physical activity. But I think you can still do that, and it's a great buffer against, I think, some of the social and emotional impacts that COVID is having on our kids.
Thanks, Maria. We had one question in the chat I want to get to too, from Lenore. It says, is it bad to say you look good today?
That's a tricky one, right? Well, if someone said that to me, I would be taken aback, because it would be physical attractiveness, and it would be inappropriate, to be quite honest, right? So I would frame that a little bit more. And your effort looks fantastic to me. I love the way I was kind of keying in on your technique today, and that was awesome. You're looking great, right? So if you couch it with another term, then it allows kids a frame of reference. But a general topic, right, a general statement like that, a kid, yes, but then they're like, what do you mean by that? And again, you kind of have to be intentional about making connections for kids. That's a good question, though. Thank you, Lenore.
Well, I want to be respectful of Dr. Newton's time. Are there any other questions out there? Anyone just kind of has on the edge of their seat to ask here? I don't see any popping up right now.
Feel free to email me. I have my contact information at the end of the presentation. You can also give me a holler. I'm actually at work, and I go to work every day. So, and I'm the only one here at the University of Utah, I'll have you know. But I'm happy to address your questions if you want to talk about these issues further.
Well, thank you, Dr. Newton, and thank you for staying late at work this evening to present to us. We really appreciate it. This is a great message for all of us, and this is something that I'll share with our other parents and also with our coaches. I think this is something for us to. Everyone can benefit from hearing this message, and it's certainly consistent with our mission and goals. So, thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I thank you so much for the invitation, and let's pray for a little bit of snow this winter.
Yeah. Sounds
Talk
great.
to you later.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you, Luke.
Bye.